Welcome, dear friend, and thank you for being here, softly settling in beside me. Tonight we drift gently into a world long past, a world where winters were fierce and unyielding, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, and nights so long they seem endless. This is the story of why you wouldn't last a day in a Viking winter. As you listen, I wonder, where are you joining from? What hour graces your part of the world? If you feel like it, share a quiet note below, a small hello from wherever you rest art now. Imagine yourself stepping quietly into the frostbitten air, under skies heavy with swirling snow. Hear the crunch of footsteps on frozen earth, the hush of the northern wind weaving through tall, silent trees. The world seems still, yet alive with secrets from centuries ago. Here, in this cold embrace, the Viking winter awaits, fierce, wild, and utterly unforgiving. Let's wander softly through its shadows together. You are standing on the rocky shore of a Norwegian fjord in late autumn, where the sea is a deep, steel-grey mirror under a pale sky. The sharp scent of salt mixes with the resin of wet pine carried. On the wind, across the water, mountains rise like ancient fortresses, their upper slopes already powdered with snow. This is the Viking homeland, on the threshold of winter, a place where beauty is vast, but survival is never guaranteed. The change in the season is not sudden here. It begins with the light itself. Each day, the sun slips lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the land even at midday. By midwinter, the sun will only brush the horizon before disappearing again, leaving 20 hours of darkness. This darkness is not complete blackness. It has a dim, blue-gray glow, like the world seen through smoked glass. For the Vikings, this light was a constant reminder of how short the working day had become. Winter preparations were already well underway long before the first snow. Summer had been a frantic season, fields of barley harvested, hay stored. For the animals, fish nets pulled heavy from the sea. All this work had to be completed before the fjord itself began to freeze, because once the ice came, trade and travel by water would almost vanish. The fjord in winter was a living thing. Small sheets of ice would first appear near the shore, breaking apart with the tide. Then, as the mountain streams froze and the cold deepened, the ice thickened. In some years, the shallows froze solid enough to walk on. In others, it remained treacherous, cracking under the weight of a careless step. A fall into those waters, colder than most rivers in the world, could end a life in minutes. The longhouses along the shore became the heart of winter life. Their walls of timber and turf trapped warmth as best they could, but the wind found its way through every seam. A single hearth fire burned constantly in the center of the hall, its smoke curling upwards and escaping through a small hole in the roof. The air inside was warm but smoky, leaving eyes stinging and lungs raw. Comfort was not the goal. Survival was outside. The village slowed to a quiet rhythm. Livestock were kept close, fodder carefully rationed. Food stores were guarded with discipline, salted fish, dried meat, stored grain. Every mouthful eaten too soon could mean hunger before spring. Families measured their days in small tasks, repairing tools, mending clothes, telling stories to pass the endless night. Winter in the Viking North was more than a season. It was a trial of endurance. Even a well-prepared community could face sickness, accidents, or unexpected storms. And in a land without modern rescue or medicine, these were not inconveniences, they were life and death matters. As the first real snow begins to fall, you can almost feel the air grow heavier. The fjord grows quieter, the birds disappear, and a stillness settles in that is both peaceful and ominous. You watch the flakes drift down onto the frozen shore, knowing that each one is a marker of time, a reminder that the long night has only just begun, and you can't help but wonder. For the people who lived here 1,000 years ago, what was it like to face a winter that seemed to have no end? As the cold deepens, the world you see around you shifts from a landscape to a frozen challenge. The fjord's dark waters become a patchwork of ice and open sea, fragile and unpredictable. For the Vikings, this was a crucial time. The very shape of their daily lives changed with the ice's advance. The ships, once symbols of freedom and adventure, lay moored and useless. Wooden hulls creaked under frost, sails furled and frozen stiff. Without the ability to sail, the Vikings lost their primary connection to other communities. Trade routes were severed, and news from distant lands fell silent. Isolation tightened its grip on the village. In this frozen stillness, survival depended on meticulous preparation and community cooperation. Villagers gathered to share scarce resources, pooling their stored food to ensure everyone made it through. Salted and dried, fish became the mainstay, supplemented by preserved meats and whatever grain had been saved. Fresh vegetables were a memory, replaced by root vegetables stored in cool cellars. But even these supplies were limited. The cold itself was relentless. Thick fur and layers of woolen clothing protected skin from frostbite, but fingers and toes were vulnerable. Everyday tasks became difficult chores: gathering firewood, tending animals, and mending tools all required effort against the biting wind and numbness. The longhouse was more than shelter. It was a refuge from the storm. Inside, the family cluster closed around the hearth, the fire a fragile but vital heart. Smoke filled the room, a constant reminder of the balance between warmth and suffocation. At times, the smoke seemed worse than the cold. Yet the fire's glow was a comfort that no blanket could replace. Winter darkness also carried a psychological weight. Days blended into nights, and back again without clear distinction, confusing the body's rhythms. The Vikings told stories, recited sagas, and sang songs to keep spirits alive. These were not mere pastimes, but essential tools against despair. The long, dark winter could erode hope if not met with communal resilience. Outside the village, the landscape was harsh and unforgiving. Snow-covered fields were silent and empty, hiding dangers beneath the surface. Predators like wolves prowled closer to settlements, driven by hunger. Encounters with these animals could be deadly, so watchmen were posted to warn the village of any approaching threat. Despite the hardships, winter was also a time of quiet reflection and planning. Farmers and hunters used the enforced pause to repair weapons, sharpen tools, and prepare for spring's tasks. The cycle of life slowed but did not stop. Even the longest night would end, yet questions remained. How did the Vikings endure winters when resources were stretched thin and the threat of starvation loomed? How did isolation affect their relations with other communities, and what strategies did they use to survive when the sea was locked in ice? The answers lie deeper in the stories of these frozen fjords, waiting to be uncovered as winter tightens its grip, as winter deepened. The frozen fjords mirrored the endurance of those who called this harsh land home. The long months of cold and darkness tested every skill, resource, and bond within the Viking community. Survival was never certain. Food stores sometimes ran low, and sickness spread in cramped, smoky longhouses. Still, the Vikings adapted. Salted fish and dried meats provided steady nutrition, while root vegetables like turnips and cabbage stored underground added vital vitamins. Every scrap was carefully rationed. Cooperation was key. Villagers acted like tight-knit families, sharing resources and labor. Elders passed down knowledge about preserving food, maintaining warm clothing, and spotting early illness. Children learned early that winter demanded patience and quiet work, not idleness. Evenings in the longhouse were filled with storytelling sagas of gods, heroes, and nature's cycles. These stories weren't mere entertainment. They reinforced identity and hope. The communal fire became a symbol of life, a glowing bond holding the community together in a frozen world. Winter also offered opportunities. Some Vikings mastered ice fishing, drilling holes in thick ice to catch cod and other fish below. This quiet activity supplemented diets and kept a connection to the sea when ships were trapped in ice. The cold sometimes bred conflict. Scarcity heightened tensions between neighbors, and raids remained a threat even in frozen months. Yet, the harsh conditions limited large battles. Winter was a time for planning, not war. When spring arrived, thawing fjords freed the Vikings. Ships were repaired and launched, trade resumed, and the cycle of work began again. But winter left its mark on bodies, hardened by cold, minds shaped by darkness, and traditions forged through slow endurance. Looking back, winter in the Viking North was more than a seasonal change, which a profound test of human resilience against nature's relentless power. What may seem unbearable today was simply life for those living 1,000 years ago among frozen fjords. As you drift into your quiet night, consider those long winters, how Vikings endured, adapted, and found warmth not just in fire, but in community and story. What lessons might their struggles hold for us now, in a world far from frozen fjords, but still touched by nature's challenges? Imagine stepping outside into the biting cold of a Viking winter. The air is sharp and unforgiving, and your skin stings from the wind that cuts through even the thickest of layers. For those living in the north during the Viking Age, surviving winter meant mastering the art of dressing, not just for comfort, but for survival. Clothing in Viking times was far from the fashion statements we see today. It was entirely practical, designed to shield the body from the harsh elements. The Vikings relied heavily on materials readily available from their environment, primarily wool, fur, and reindeer skins. Each material had a unique role in the battle against the cold. Wool was the foundation. Sheep were among the few domesticated animals the Vikings kept, providing not only meat but vital wool for clothing. Wool fibers trap air, creating insulation that keeps warmth close to the skin. Vikings spun and wove wool into thick, dense fabrics for tunics, trousers, and cloaks. These woolen garments, when properly layered, could resist chilling winds and hold warmth even when damp. Underneath their woolen outerwear, many Vikings wore linen, a lighter, breathable fabric made from flax. Linen provided a base layer that helped wick moisture away from the skin, an early form of what we might call thermal underwear. Moisture management was critical. Damp skin in freezing temperatures could quickly lead to hypothermia. Fur was the next essential layer. Animal pelt softened from wild animals, like foxes, otters, or seals, were prized for their thick, soft undercoats and windproof outer hairs. Fur-lined hoods, mittens, and boots protected the extremities, where frostbite was most likely to strike. Reindeer skins were especially valuable, offering durable, insulating leather with fur still attached. These skins were fashioned into cloaks or heavy outer garments, providing a windproof barrier when layered over wool. Beyond the materials, Viking clothing was layered strategically. It was common to wear multiple layers of wool and fur, adjusting thickness according to the severity of the weather and the activity level. Heavy cloaks could be wrapped tightly around the body, while lighter underlayers allowed for mobility during daily tasks, like chopping wood or tending animals. Footwear was another critical consideration. The Vikings wore sturdy leather boots, often lined with fur or straw for insulation. Keeping feet dry was a constant challenge, especially when traveling over snow or frozen ground. Some archaeological finds suggest that the Vikings stuffed their boots with grass or moss to add extra warmth. Primitive but effective insulation. Accessories like gloves, mittens, and hats were equally important. Ear flaps on hoods helped prevent frostbite, and woolen caps covered the head beneath heavier fur-lined hoods. Even simple cloth wrappings could be used to protect the face from biting winds. But clothing was not just about materials and layering. It was a knowledge passed down through generations. Mothers taught their children how to dress properly for the weather, and skilled craftsmen carefully prepared and treated furs and leathers to maximize their warmth and durability. This knowledge was essential because a single mistake like wearing damp clothing or exposing skin to freezing air could be deadly. The Vikings' mastery of winter clothing was not just practical but also a form of resilience. Their survival depended on this armor of wool and fur, worn day in and day out through months of snow and ice. And yet, despite all these protections, one question remains. How did ordinary Vikings cope during the harshest storms, when even the best clothing could not fully shield them from the cold? As winter tightened its grip, the Vikings faced not only plummeting temperatures, but relentless storms that made even the best prepared clothing struggle against nature's fury. The layers of wool and fur that once provided warmth could become heavy and soaked with freezing rain or snow, turning insulation into a chilling weight. To combat this, Vikings developed clever methods to maintain their clothing and protect themselves as much as possible. One common technique was treating leather and fur with animal fats or oils. These natural waterproofing agents helped repel moisture, keeping outer garments drier for longer periods. This was crucial when hunting or traveling across open landscapes, where shelter was scarce. Reindeer skins, prized for their thickness and natural oils, were especially suited for such treatment. Vikings often used them to make cloaks and boots that could resist water better than simple wool. The oils also softened the leather, making garments more flexibly important when moving through snowy forests or climbing icy slopes. Inside their longhouses, care for clothing was a daily task. Wet woolens and furs were hung near the fire to dry, but never too close. Heat could damage the fibers or cause shrinking. Repairs were constant. A torn seam or a worn patch could mean cold skin and increased risk of frostbite. Skilled artisans mended garments carefully, passing their knowledge down as a vital survival skill. Clothing was not uniform across all Viking regions. Coastal communities had better access to seal and otter pelts, while inland and northern groups relied more heavily on reindeer and other wild animals. Trade routes also influenced available materials. Finer wool from southern regions or even silk from distant lands found their way into some garments. Though these were rare and expensive, but no amount of material could fully protect a person caught in a blizzard or trapped outdoors during a sudden freeze. In such moments, clothing was only part of a larger survival strategy. The Vikings learned to read the weather, to seek shelter quickly, and to avoid unnecessary risks in severe conditions. Another challenge was the limitations of their clothing in extreme cold, especially at night. Fires inside homes provided warmth, but when venturing outside, the cold could penetrate even the thickest layers. Fingers, ears, and noses were vulnerable, and frostbite was a common affliction. The loss of these extremities could be debilitating, yet many accepted it as part of life. Children and the elderly were particularly at risk, so villagers often adapted daily routines to protect their most vulnerable. Tasks outside were done during the warmest parts of the day, and communal support ensured no one was left alone in harsh weather. This cooperation extended to clothing, with garments being passed down or shared among family members. Despite these hardships, clothing also held cultural significance. The cut, color, and quality of fabrics could signal social status or occupation. Even in winter, Vikings expressed identity through their garments, balancing necessity with tradition. Embroidered hems, decorative clasps, and carefully dyed fabrics revealed a community's pride and resilience. Yet, as the cold settled in and the layers grew heavier, one question lingered. How did the Vikings maintain mobility and efficiency in such cumbersome clothing when survival often demanded quick action and endurance? By the depths of winter, the Vikings had perfected a careful balance between protection and mobility, essential for surviving in one of medieval Europe's coldest and harshest climates. Their layered wool and fur clothing, though heavy, was thoughtfully designed to allow them to work, travel, and defend their homes despite the freezing conditions. One key to maintaining mobility was in the tailoring. Viking garments were cut close to the body, reducing unnecessary bulk but still allowing enough room for layering underneath. Woolen tunics and trousers provided warmth without being loose enough to snag on branches or tools during outdoor work. Fur-lined boots were sturdy yet flexible, helping steady footing over slippery ice and snow. The Vikings also adapted their clothing depending on the situation. Near the hearth or inside longhouses, they could shed outer layers to avoid overheating in the smoky warmth, but when stepping outside, they bundled up again with thick cloaks, gloves, and hats. This layering system was an early form of adaptive clothing. Much like how we dress for cold weather today, this practical knowledge was deeply ingrained in Viking culture. From a young age, children learned how to dress properly, recognize signs of frostbite, and protect exposed skin. Skilled craftsmen passed down the arts of tanning hides and sewing durable seam skills, vital for creating garments that could withstand long winters. Still, no clothing could fully eliminate the dangers of frostbite, hypothermia, or exposure, especially during sudden storms or long journeys. Archaeological finds of frostbitten bones and preserved bodies in permafrost remind us of how fragile life could be. Yet, these garments were more than just protection, they were symbols of resilience. Wearing thick wool and soft fur was like armor against the relentless winter, a daily ritual of endurance connecting each wearer to generations who had faced the same darkness and cold. In the end, the Vikings' mastery of wool, fur, and reindeer skins stands as a testament to human ingenuity confronting nature's extremes. Their clothing was a vital tool shielding bodies from frost and shaping the rhythms of life through long, dark winters. So tonight, as you quietly reflect, wrapped in your own blankets, think of those ancient layers worn through snow and storm. How do their lessons of endurance still whisper to us today? in a world where cold is often comfort rather than challenge. Picture a small Viking village nestled along the rocky coast, where the cold wind from the fjords carries the sharp scent of salt and smoke. Inside the longhouse, families gather close to the fire, their hands busy with the preparation and preservation of food, a task as vital as breathing during the long, harsh winter months. Winter was the season when fresh food was scarce, and the Vikings had to rely on what they had stored during the warmer months. Their diet changed drastically from the variety available in summer to a strict regimen focused on preservation and endurance. Among the staples, salted herring and barley bread stood out as essential survival foods. Salted herring was more than just a meal. It was a carefully prepared resource, crucial for lasting through months when fishing was impossible. Vikings caught large quantities of herring during the late summer, using nets and long lines. The fish were then cleaned, gutted, and heavily salted to draw out moisture and prevent spoilage. This process allowed them to store herring in barrels, ready to be eaten throughout the winter. Salt itself was a precious commodity, sometimes obtained through evaporation of seawater or traded from distant regions. Its value extended beyond flavor. It was the key to preserving fish, meat, and even some vegetables, turning perishable food into lasting sustenance. Salted herring was often eaten dried or lightly rehydrated, providing much-needed protein and fat during the cold months. Barley was the primary grain grown by Vikings, hardy enough to survive in the cooler climate of the north. During autumn, harvest barley was threshed, winnowed, and ground into coarse flour. Barley bread, dense and dark, became the staple carbohydrate source for the winter. Unlike modern white bread, Viking barley bread was heavy, full of grain, husks, and bran, and baked on flat stones or in simple ovens. This bread was tough and filling, designed to sustain energy over long days spent laboring in the cold. It was often eaten with whatever fat or broth was available, sometimes butter from cows or goats, other times a thin soup made from dried vegetables or salted meat. In addition to herring and barley bread, the Viking winter diet included preserved meats, dried fruits like berries, and root vegetables such as turnips and onions, stored in cellars beneath layers of earth and straw. Fresh vegetables were nearly impossible to grow once frost set in, so reliance on stored food was absolute. Water was usually drawn from wells or collected rainwater. Brewing ale from barley was common, not just for its warmth, but because it was safer to drink than potentially contaminated water sources. Ale was a thick, nutritious beverage that helped Vikings maintain calories in the cold season. Eating was both a necessity and a social ritual during winter. Feasts, though smaller than those in summer, were occasions for bonding and storytelling, where food served as a reminder of survival and continuity through the harsh months. But even with careful preservation, hunger was a constant threat. What happened when the barrels ran low and the bread became stale? How did the Norse prepare for the possibility that their winter stores might not last? As winter deepened and the fjords froze over, the Vikings' reliance on preserved foods became absolute. The salty temps of herring and the dense chew of barley bread were constants on the table, anchoring daily life amid the scarcity and cold. But sustaining a community on such limited fare was far from simple, and the Norse had to develop strategies to stretch their resources as far as possible. Salted herring, though crucial, was a challenging food. The heavy salting preserved the fish, but also made it tough and intensely salty. To make it edible and more digestible, Vikings often soaked the fish in water or broth before cooking it. This softened the flesh and reduced the salt content, making meals more palatable. Sometimes, herring was simmered into stews with vegetables or grains, adding variety and warmth to the diet. Barley bread, dense and hearty, provided necessary calories but lacked the freshness and flavor of summer grain. Stored in cool, dry places, it could last through winter but quickly became hard and stale. Some families moistened old bread with broth or ale to soften it, turning it into a filling porridge-like meal. Others used it as a base for spreading animal fats or honey, if available, to improve taste and nutrition. Preserving enough food was a constant concern. A poor harvest or a bad fishing season meant rationing and even starvation. Archaeological studies suggest that during harsh winters, the Vikings turned to less appetizing fare. Bark bread, made by mixing tree bark with flour, or boiled roots and grasses when stores ran perilously low. Such emergency foods were a last resort but essential in preventing total famine. The Viking diet during winter was also shaped by the need to conserve energy. Physical activity was reduced as daylight hours shrank and temperatures dropped. Heavy manual labor gave way to maintenance tasks inside the longhouse, allowing bodies to survive on fewer calories while still keeping warm. Nutritionists today note that despite the limitations, the Viking winter diet was relatively balanced. For its time, protein from fish and preserved meats, carbohydrates from barley, fats from dairy and animal products, and vitamins from stored vegetables and berries. Yet the monotony and scarcity must have worn on even the hardiest souls. Communal meals played a vital role in morale. Sharing food reinforced social bonds and offered comfort against the bleakness of winter. Feasting traditions continued in a smaller form, with special dishes prepared during the midwinter Yule festival, when salted meats might be cooked with spices, and ale flowed more freely. Still, the looming question remained: how did the Vikings plan for winters when their stored food might not last? What systems of trade, barter, or cooperation helped prevent disaster when local supplies ran dangerously low? When winter stores ran dangerously low, Viking communities faced harsh choices, and their survival depended on careful planning, trade, and a willingness to adapt. The scarcity of food was a threat not only to individuals, but to entire villages, and the ways in which they confronted this challenge reveal much about their resilience and social structure. Trade was one lifeline. Even in the depths of winter, some fjords remained navigable or partially open, allowing traders from nearby regions to exchange goods. Salt, grain, and preserved fish were traded for other necessities like honey, wax, or even metal tools. These exchanges were vital, helping communities fill gaps in their winter supplies. But when ice thickened and travel became impossible, reliance shifted inward. Within villages, cooperation and rationing became strict. Elders and community leaders often decided how food was distributed to maximize survival chances. Families pooled their resources, and no one was allowed to hoard. The poorest and weakest, including children and the elderly, were often given priority. This social safety net was essential to preventing starvation and maintaining social order. In the most desperate times, Vikings turned to unconventional sources. Bark bread made by mixing powdered tree bark with flour was a survival food that could stretch grain stores. Though bitter and nutritionally poor, it was better than hunger. Wild roots, dried berries, and leftover scraps were gathered and consumed. These emergency foods were a testament to the ingenuity required to endure long winters, even with all precautions. Winter was a season of attrition. Mortality rates rose, especially among the young and old. Archaeological evidence of mass graves and skeletal remains from harsh winters reveals the true cost of these months. Yet the communities endured, rebuilt, and prepared anew for the next cycle. The winter diet also shaped Viking culture. The scarcity underscored the value of food and feasting, making celebrations like Yule marking the return of longer days. Or the more significant, during Yule, families would consume some of their best preserved meats and drink ale, reinforcing bonds and renewing hope. Looking back, the Vikings' winter diet was more than mere sustenance. It was a daily negotiation with nature's limits. Their reliance on salted fish, barley bread, and stored root vegetables was a practical response to a harsh environment, shaped by centuries of experience and adaptation. As you settle into your own evening meal or prepare to rest, consider the endurance behind these simple foods. How does the story of survival through salted herring and barley bread reflect broader themes of human resilience and adaptation across history? Imagine stepping inside a Viking longhouse as the dark grip of winter tightens outside. The air is thick with smoke and the scent of burning wood, mingled with the faint, earthy aroma of animal hides and damp timber. This long, narrow building home, half fortresses, the heart of survival during the coldest months. The longhouse was not just shelter. It was a carefully engineered environment designed to keep its inhabitants alive through the relentless winter. Constructed from timber frames covered with turf and thatch, its thick walls provided insulation against freezing winds. Yet no matter how solid the structure, the cold was never fully kept at bay. Central to the longhouse's survival strategy was the hearth, a large open fire pit located roughly in the middle of the building. The hearth provided warmth and a place to cook, but it also served as the social and spiritual center of the home. Flames crackled and cast flickering shadows on rough wooden walls, giving a small, precious comfort against the long nights. Smoke from the fire curled upward through a hole in the roof, but ventilation was limited. The interior was often hazy, making eyes water and throats itch, yet the smoke was a necessary evil. It helped repel insects and slowed the rot of wooden beams and thatch by discouraging moisture buildup. Heat distribution within the longhouse was uneven. The areas closest to the fire were warm and inviting, while corners farthest away could be bitterly cold. Families clustered near the hearth during the darkest hours, sharing body heat and huddling under wool and fur cloaks. Furnishings were simple but functional. Benches lined the walls, often piled with animal skins and woven textiles for insulation. Livestock might also be brought inside during the worst weather, their body heat adding a surprising degree of warmth. This practice, while practical, brought challenges, increased smoke and odors, as well as the risk of disease. Design reflected a balance between shelter and survival. Windows were few and small to minimize heat loss, and doors were heavy, often made of thick planks fitted tightly to keep out drafts. Floors were dirt or packed earth, sometimes layered, with straw to insulate against the cold ground. Winter inside a longhouse was a test of endurance. The constant smoke, the chilly corners, and the close quarters all presented hardships. But it was also a place of safety from the brutal storms raging outside and the dangers lurking in the dark wolves, marauders, or the simple cruelty of frostbite and starvation. The longhouse was a vessel of resilience, a place where families endured the long winter together, bound by necessity and tradition. As you imagine the flickering firelight, the murmur of voices telling sagas, and the faint crackle of burning wood, you can almost feel the fragile warmth that kept life alive. And yet, despite all its protections, one question lingers. How did the Vikings maintain the hearth fire during the darkest, coldest nights when fuel was scarce and storms raged endlessly outside? As winter deepened, maintaining the hearth fire became a daily and often exhausting challenge for Viking households. The fire was more than warmth. It was the lifeblood of the longhouse, providing heat, light, and a place to cook food. Yet, the relentless demand for fuel strained even the most well-prepared communities. Wood was the primary source of fuel, but dense forests could be distant, and winter storms made gathering firewood a dangerous task. Vikings collected timber throughout autumn, stacking it carefully to dry. Dry wood burned more efficiently, producing more heat and less smoke. Wet or green wood, by contrast, created choking smoke and weak flames, making life inside the longhouse miserable. Fuel scarcity meant that fires were carefully managed. Hearths were tended constantly, sometimes burning low at night to conserve wood, then stoked again at first light. A dying fire was a threat not only to comfort but to survival, especially during severe cold snaps. Smoke, while unpleasant, played a surprising role in preserving the longhouse itself. The constant drift of smoke helped deter insects that might infest stored food or damage thatching. It also created a protective environment, slowing decay of wooden beams exposed to moisture. Yet, this meant that inhabitants endured smoky eyes, sore throats, and the constant haze inside. The design of the longhouse also affected how warmth was retained. With no chimney, smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, but much of it lingered inside, limiting visibility and comfort. Windows were small and rare, letting in little light but also preventing precious heat from escaping. In larger households, multiple fires might burn in side rooms or workshops, spreading warmth throughout the building. Still, the hearth was always the focal point for gathering. Families huddled close, sharing stories, repairing clothing, or crafting tools in the flickering light. Sometimes, when storms made firewood scarce, Vikings turned to alternative fuels. Peat, partially decayed plant matter found in bogs, was cut and dried as a slow-burning fuel. Though it produced a dense smoke, peat could keep a fire alive longer when wood was limited. Livestock brought indoors contributed body heat, but this practice was a delicate balance. While animals helped warm the air, they increased humidity and odors, creating uncomfortable living conditions. The smoke from the hearth also helped mask some of these smells. Despite the hardships, the longhouse and its hearth were symbols of resilience. They embodied a deep understanding of balance between fire and smoke, warmth and cold, life and the ever-present threat of winter's bite. Still, a question remains. How did the Vikings adapt their daily routines and social life around the constraints of the longhouse hearth, ensuring survival through months of darkness and cold? As winter stretched on and the nights grew longer, the hearth remained the heart of Viking life, a place where warmth, light, and community intertwined to sustain both body and spirit. Yet surviving the dark months inside the longhouse was about more than just fire. It was about adapting daily life to the rhythms and challenges imposed by winter. Families arranged their routines around the hearth's glow. Mornings began by rekindling the fire from embers, carefully nurturing flames that had been kept alive overnight. This delicate process required skill and patience, as cold ashes could smother a fire beyond easy recovery. Once alight, the hearth provided heat for cooking simple stews and drying damp clothing, both critical for enduring the cold. Social life revolved around the fire. With few distractions, storytelling, singing, and sharing news became vital forms of connection. The sagas recited here were not mere entertainment. They reinforced cultural identity and passed down lessons for survival. In the flickering shadows, families found comfort and purpose amid the winter's bleakness. Practical tasks were also scheduled to make the most of the limited daylight and warmth. Clothing repairs, tool maintenance, and food preparation were done close to the fire, conserving body heat and allowing work to continue despite freezing temperatures outside. Children learned essential skills under the watchful eyes of elders, ensuring that knowledge was preserved for future generations. The longhouse's communal nature fostered cooperation. Sharing firewood, food, and warmth was a matter of necessity and tradition. No one could face winter's hardships alone. Villagers organized labor and resources, reinforcing bonds that were as crucial as the fire's glow itself. Yet even the strongest longhouse could not shield its inhabitants from all winter dangers. Illness spread more easily in cramped, smoky quarters. The lack of fresh air and the ever-present chill outside meant that vigilance was needed to keep the vulnerable children, the elderly, and the sick safe. By the time spring arrived, the hearth's fire seemed to symbolize endurance itself. Families emerged from their longhouse shelters, carrying with them the scars and stories of winter's trial. The experience shaped Viking culture, teaching lessons of resilience, cooperation, and respect for nature's power. So, as you rest tonight, imagine the flickering hearthlight of a Viking longhouse, and the quiet strength it provided during the darkest months. How does this ancient balance of warmth and hardship speak to our own need for connection and endurance in challenging times? As the darkest days of winter settle over the Viking north, a remarkable transformation occurs in villages scattered along fjords and forests. Amid the cold, the biting winds, and the scarcity of food, the season of Yule arrives, time of feasting, celebration, and a brief respite from the relentless hardship of winter. Yule, a midwinter festival lasting several days, was deeply rooted in Norse tradition. It marked the turning point of the year, the moment when the sun's slow return was hoped for and welcomed. This festival was not merely a holiday. It was a vital communal event, a chance to reinforce social bonds and spiritual resilience during the bleakest season. Preparing for Yule was a year-round process. Families set aside portions of their best-preserved foods, including salted meats, dried fish, and rich ales brewed from barley. Unlike the typical winter diet of hearty but plain staples, Yule fare was richer and more varied, a luxury designed to sustain both body and morale. Central to the feast was the ritual consumption of a boar or pig, animals whose sacrifice was believed to honor the gods and ensure fertility for the coming year. The boar's meat was salted, smoked, and carefully stored to be cooked and shared during Yule. Roasting a whole boar was no small task. It required skill and cooperation among villagers, emphasizing the communal nature of the celebration. Ale played a significant role in Yule. Brewing was an essential skill, and the thick, potent beverage served as both sustenance and ceremonial drink. Ale was consumed in large quantities, often accompanied by mead, and its warmth helped fend off the chill during long nights of storytelling and song. The feast itself was a spectacle of community and culture. Long tables, simple wooden planks, laden with bowls of salted fish, barley bread, root vegetables, and smoked meats. The rich aromas filled the long houses, drawing families and neighbors together in close quarters warmed by flickering firelight. Yule was also a time for storytelling and ritual. Tales of gods, heroes, and the natural cycles were recited, connecting the people to their history and the forces beyond their control. The act of sharing stories by the hearth was a form of spiritual nourishment, reinforcing hope and collective identity. Children received special attention during Yule, often gifted with small tokens or treats, rare luxuries in the austere winter months. These gestures underscored the festival's role in nurturing community and continuity amid hardship. Yet, the festival was not without its tensions. Food, though more abundant during Yule, was still precious. The feast reminded everyone of the delicate balance between plenty and scarcity. It was a momentary triumph over winter's grip, but also a reminder that survival depended on cooperation and prudence. As the feast ended and the last embers glowed, families faced the long months ahead, still cold, still challenging. The question remained, how did the spirit of Yule help Vikings endure the relentless winter? And what rituals or beliefs sustained them when the feast was over and the harsh reality returned, offering more than just physical nourishment? The rituals, stories, and communal bonds forged during these days carried the Vikings through the remaining dark months. When the cold seemed endless and survival precarious, central to the Yule tradition was the belief in the cycle of nature, death, and rebirth, darkness giving way to light. The festival was a symbolic marker, reassuring the Norse that despite winter's harshness, spring and renewal were certain. This hope was woven into every ritual and story told by the fire. One important ritual was the Yule logger, large tree trunk carefully selected and brought into the longhouse to burn slowly over several days. The log's slow, steady burn symbolized the sun's return and was believed to bring protection and prosperity. Embers from the Yule log were saved to kindle the next year's fires, creating a tangible link between one winter and the next. Feasting and drinking were accompanied by offerings to the gods, particularly Odin and Thor, who were thought to influence the forces of nature. Sacrifices, including the ritual slaughter of animals, were made to ensure the community's well-being and the fertility of the land. These acts reinforced a sense of control and connection to the world around them. Beyond, the spiritual Yule was a critical social event. The harsh isolation of winter often bred tension and loneliness, but the festival brought people together. Sharing food and drink created a sense of unity and mutual support. These moments of joy and connection were vital for mental health, helping individuals endure months of darkness and scarcity. Children's role during Yule was significant. They were not only recipients of gifts, but active participants in the rituals and celebrations. This involvement ensured that traditions were passed down, embedding cultural knowledge and resilience in the next generation. Even so, the pressure to prepare adequately for Yule was immense. Families who failed to store enough food or brew sufficient ale risked social embarrassment, or worse, jeopardizing the survival of their community. This necessity made the festival a powerful motivator for careful planning and resource management throughout the year. The lingering question was how these traditions evolved over time. How did the Vikings' deep connection to Yule and its rituals shape their identity? And how did this festival survive transformations as Christianity spread across Scandinavia? As centuries passed and the winds of change swept across Scandinavia, the Yule festival evolved, absorbing new influences yet retaining the core elements that had sustained Viking communities through the darkest winters. The arrival of Christianity introduced new customs and meanings, but the ancient rhythms of midwinter celebration endured in surprising ways. Christian missionaries sought to replace pagan rituals with Christian holidays, often aligning Christmas celebrations with existing Yule traditions. This blending helped ease the transition for Norse communities, preserving communal feasting, gift-giving, and the symbolism of light returning amid darkness. The Yule log, once a sacred emblem of the sun, became a festive decoration, while the feast itself remained a time of gathering and renewal. Despite these changes, the spirit of Yule remained rooted in resilience. The festival continued to mark a pause in the harsh cycle of winter, a moment to reflect, celebrate, and prepare for the year ahead. Its endurance speaks to the human need for ritual in the face of uncertainty and hardship. In modern Scandinavia and beyond, echoes of Yule survive in Christmas customs dailies, by the fire, special meals shared with family, and symbols of light. In the darkness, these traditions remind us that beneath the surface of celebration lies a deep history of survival and community. Looking back, the Viking Yule festival was far more than a mere holiday. It was a crucial element of social and spiritual survival, a beacon of hope and connection during the coldest, darkest days. It embodied the human capacity to find warmth not only in fire and food, but in shared experience and belief. As you drift into your own restful night, imagine the flicker of the Yule log, the murmur of ancient stories, and the taste of salted meats and sweet ale. How do these enduring rituals remind us that even in the bleakest times, community and tradition can light the way forward? When we think of how Vikings survived the brutal winters of the North, a curious question sometimes arises. Did they simply sleep through the coldest months, entering a kind of human hibernation? The idea of Vikings retreating into long, deep slumbers to escape winter's hardships is a fascinating image, but it is more myth than reality. Hibernation, as observed in bears or other animals, involves a prolonged period of inactivity and lowered metabolic function to conserve energy when food is scarce. Humans, of course, do not have this biological capability. Yet, the harsh Viking winters, with their short days and biting cold, have inspired legends suggesting that people might have entered states of deep rest or dormancy. In truth, the Vikings maintained active, though altered, daily routines throughout winter. The reduction in daylight hours certainly affected behavior. Long nights meant more time indoors, fewer hours of outdoor labor, and a slower pace of life. But sleeping away the season was not an option. Survival required vigilance, maintenance of supplies, care for livestock, and readiness for dangers like raids or illness. Winter sleep patterns among the Vikings were shaped by necessity and environment. People likely slept in multiple segments throughout the 24-hour cycle, a pattern common before the advent of modern lighting. First and second sleep periods of rest, separated by waking hours allowed for chores, socializing, or tending fires during the night. This segmented sleep provided both rest and alertness, important in times when immediate response could mean life or death. Moreover, longhouses often housed multiple generations and even livestock, creating a communal warmth and activity that discouraged extended inactivity. The smoke-filled interior was rarely quiet or still, and daily life, while slowed, continued steadily. Tasks such as mending clothes, sharpening tools, and storytelling kept people engaged and connected. The myth of hibernation may also stem from misunderstandings of winter rituals. Certain Norse sagas and folklore mention periods of rest or withdrawal during the coldest times, but these references are symbolic or exaggerated. They often highlight the human need to conserve energy and endure hardship, rather than literal sleep. Yet, the concept holds a metaphorical truth. Vikings adapted their lives to winter's demands by slowing down, conserving energy, and seeking shelter. In this sense, winter was a season of endurance, less about action and more about patient survival until the sun returned. So while the Vikings did not hibernate, they mastered the art of living with winter, balancing rest and activity, community and solitude, warmth and cold. This nuanced approach was a key to their survival in a world where nature's harshness was relentless. What can the idea of Viking hibernation teach us about human adaptability to seasonal change, even if it's more myth than fact? Though the Vikings didn't hibernate, they did adapt their behavior in ways that might resemble the idea of winter slowing down. The changing light, colder temperatures, and scarcity of resources shaped a rhythm of life quite different from the busy, active seasons of spring and summer. In winter, the Vikings naturally reduced their outdoor work. Farming tasks paused as fields froze and snow blanketed the landscape. Hunting and fishing became riskier and less productive. Instead, the focus shifted to indoor activities essential for survival, repairing tools and clothing, preparing preserved food, tending fires, and caring for animals sheltered within or near the longhouse. This seasonal slowdown was a form of adaptive conservation. People conserved energy by limiting strenuous physical exertion when food calories were harder to come by. This strategy helped avoid exhaustion and illness during a time when recovery was slower. The segmented sleep pattern, common before artificial lighting, also contributed to this rhythm. First sleep might begin shortly after sunset, followed by a period of wakefulness during the night. This wakeful time was not idle. Vikings used it for chores, quiet conversation, or reflection. Then, they returned to a second sleep before dawn. This cycle allowed flexibility and responsiveness, useful for keeping watch during winter's long nights. In addition, the communal nature of Viking longhouses fostered a collective resilience. Sharing warmth and shelter meant that no one faced the cold and darkness alone. This social cohesion was crucial. Loneliness and isolation could lead to despair and weakened health, especially during harsh winters. Folklore and saga literature sometimes hint at a symbolic withdrawal during winter periods, when heroes or gods retreat from the world, only to return renewed. These narratives reflect the psychological impact of winter's hardships rather than actual hibernation. They express the human need for rest and renewal amid adversity, a theme universal across cultures and eras. Importantly, the Vikings' adaptations show a deep understanding of their environment. They did not resist winter, but worked with its cycles, adjusting activity and rest to align with nature's demands. This balance was vital for maintaining health and community cohesion until the spring thaw. Still, a question remains: how did the Vikings' winter lifestyle affect their mental and social well-being? Did the long nights and isolation spur creativity, storytelling, or spiritual reflection, or did they deepen hardships and fears? The long winter nights in Viking lands, while physically demanding, also carved out a unique space for mental and social activity and interplay of hardship and creativity shaped by the environment. Far from a season of dormancy, winter became a time for storytelling, reflection, and cultural expression that enriched Viking life. Beyond mere survival, The darkness and stillness of winter nights fostered an atmosphere where oral traditions flourished. Families and communities gathered around the hearth, sharing sagas and legends that preserved history, values, and lessons. These stories were more than entertainment. They reinforced identity, taught practical knowledge, and offered comfort in difficult times. The ritualized telling of sagas and poems helped structure the long nights. The cadence of stories and songs provided rhythm to the days when sunlight was scarce. In this way, winter became a season of cultural productivity, countering the physical lethargy that the cold imposed. Moreover, spiritual reflection was an important aspect of winter life. Norse beliefs held that the changing seasons were tied to cosmic cycles, gods, and natural forces. Winter's darkness was seen as a necessary phase before renewal. This worldview offered a sense of order and hope, essential for enduring hardship. The communal aspect of Viking winter life also helped mitigate isolation. Longhouses housed extended families and sometimes neighbors, creating close-knit groups where cooperation was key. Sharing resources, labor, and warmth strengthened social bonds and provided psychological support. Yet, despite these adaptations, winter still posed risks to mental health. The long darkness could bring melancholy or anxiety, conditions modern science links to seasonal affective disorder. While Vikings lacked our medical understanding, their traditions of communal gathering, ritual, and storytelling likely offered coping mechanisms. In sum, the idea that Vikings hibernated is a myth, but their winter lifestyle was far from passive. It was a carefully balanced dance between activity and rest, hardship and cultural richness, survival and community. Their experience reminds us that human adaptability extends beyond physical endurance to include social and spiritual resilience. As you prepare to rest tonight, consider the long nights of the Vikings not as a time of sleep alone, but as a season of storytelling, connection, and quiet strength. How might embracing both rest and engagement during difficult times enrich our own lives today? Winter in the Viking North was not only a season of cold and darkness, but also a time when the landscape transformed into a frozen expanse of snow and ice. For the Vikings, who were known for their exploration and travel, moving across this challenging terrain required specialized skills and equipment. Among these, snowshoes were a vital tool that enabled travel over deep snow and frozen ground. The dense forests and rugged mountains of Scandinavia became difficult to traverse when winters heavy snow blanketed the land. Foot travel without assistance was slow and exhausting, as boots would sink into the snow, making each step a laborious effort. To overcome this, Vikings crafted snowshoes, large, flat frameworks strapped to their feet to distribute weight and prevent sinking. Snowshoes came in various shapes and sizes, often constructed from wood and rawhide. The frames were carefully bent and lashed together, creating a durable yet lightweight structure. The webbing inside the frame was woven tightly to provide support while allowing flexibility. These shoes had to be sturdy enough to handle uneven terrain, frozen streams, and forest debris hidden beneath the snow. Traveling with snowshoes allowed Vikings to maintain mobility during winter, when many others would be confined indoors. Hunters could pursue game such as deer and elk, and messengers or traders could traverse long distances to deliver news or goods. The ability to move efficiently across snowy landscapes was crucial for survival and maintaining connections between communities. Routes marked by snowshoe trails became lifelines in the frozen months. Villagers relied on these pathways to send and receive supplies, communicate warnings, or gather for seasonal events like Yule. Skilled travelers knew the safest and most efficient trails, avoiding dangerous ice patches, deep drifts, or areas where predators lurked. However, winter travel was never without risk. Blizzards could obscure paths, and freezing temperatures threatened frostbite and hypothermia. Travelers had to be prepared with warm clothing, provisions, and knowledge of the land. In some cases, entire groups would set out together for safety, sharing resources and watching for signs of danger. The invention and use of snowshoes highlight Viking adaptability. Faced with a harsh environment, they engineered practical solutions that expanded their world rather than confining them. The frozen north did not halt their movement. It simply demanded new skills and tools. Yet, a question remains: how did winter travel influence Viking society beyond survival? Did the ability to traverse snowbound lands shape their trade, warfare, or cultural exchange during the coldest months? The Vikings' ability to travel across snowbound landscapes during winter was more than a mere survival tactic. It shaped the very fabric of their society, economy, and even warfare. Snowshoe travel allowed communities to remain connected when other means were impossible, influencing trade routes, communication, and military strategy. Trade, a cornerstone of Viking culture, did not halt with the onset of winter. While sea voyages became too dangerous or impossible due to ice and storms, overland routes remained open, albeit challenging. Using snowshoes, traders moved between villages and towns, carrying goods such as furs, iron, and salt. These overland journeys kept markets alive during the cold months and prevented isolation, ensuring a steady flow of resources crucial for survival. Communication was another critical function served by winter travelers. Messengers on snowshoes could quickly navigate frozen terrain to deliver news, warnings, or requests for assistance. This network of communication was vital in times of crisis, such as impending raids or shortages of food and fuel. The speed and reliability of winter travel helped communities respond more effectively to threats. Military operations also adapted to the winter environment. While large naval expeditions ceased, Viking raiding and defense did not stop altogether. Warriors trained in snowshoe travel could launch surprise attacks or conduct reconnaissance missions in winter's depths. The ability to move swiftly and silently over snow gave strategic advantages against enemies unprepared for such conditions. The social dimension of winter travel was equally important. Journeys across snowy lands often required cooperation and shared knowledge. Experienced travelers mentored the young, passing down skills and local lore essential for safe passage. Seasonal gatherings, reached by following snowshoe trails, reinforced alliances and cultural ties. Despite these advantages, winter travel remained perilous. Blizzards could strike without warning, and deep snowdrifts hid treacherous terrain. Travelers faced the constant threat of frostbite and exhaustion. Preparation was carrying extra clothing, food, and fire-starting materials could mean the difference between life and death. The persistence of travel during winter reveals the Vikings' refusal to be confined by the season. Instead, they embraced the challenges of their environment, turning obstacles into opportunities. Snowshoe trails were not merely paths through snow, they were arteries of survival, culture, and power. Still, one might wonder, how did these winter journeys affect Viking perceptions of the landscape and their place within it? Did moving through the frozen world shape their myths, stories, or relationship with nature? The act of winter travel with snowshoes did more than connect Viking communities. Physically, it profoundly influenced their worldview and cultural narratives. Navigating the frozen, often hostile landscape required respect, knowledge, and a deep awareness of nature's power elements that became woven into Norse mythology and identity. The stark beauty and dangers of the winter terrain shaped how Vikings understood their environment. Snow-covered forests, frozen rivers, and icy mountains were not merely obstacles. They were alive with spirits and forces. Many sagas and poems reference winter landscapes as places of mystery, testing the bravery and wisdom of heroes. The long nights and harsh conditions symbolized both challenge and transformation, reflecting the cycles of death and rebirth central to Norse belief. The skill required for winter travel elevated those who mastered it. Hunters, scouts, and messengers were respected for their endurance and knowledge. Their journeys were not only practical but spiritual quests, reinforcing a connection between people and the land. This bond fostered a sense of belonging and resilience amid isolation. Seasonal travel also allowed for cultural exchange during times when sea travel was impossible. Stories, goods, and news passed along snowshoe trails linked disparate communities, preserving a shared Norse identity despite geographical distances. Winter journeys became a metaphor for endurance and adaptability, celebrated in oral tradition. Furthermore, the necessity of cooperation on these journeys reflected broader social values. Survival depended on trust, mutual aid, and collective wisdom. These principles underpinned Viking society and were reinforced during the long, dark months when individuals relied heavily on their community. In a modern context, the Viking experience of winter travel reminds us of humanity's enduring relationship with nature, dynamic interplay of challenge and respect. It suggests that even in seemingly barren landscapes, life, culture, and connection persist. As you close your eyes tonight, picture the quiet crunch of snow beneath wooden frames, the distant call of a lone traveler crossing the frozen wilds, and the ancient rhythms of a people moving with the seasons. How might our own journeys through life be shaped by the landscapes, both outer and inner, that we traverse? As the Viking winter settled in with its long, dark nights, an ever-present danger lurked just beyond the flickering firelight of the longhouse. Wolves, these fierce predators, adapted to the harsh northern climate, were a constant threat to both livestock and humans. Understanding the wolf threat reveals much about Viking daily life, their relationship with nature, and the measures they took to protect themselves during the cold months. Wolves were widespread across Scandinavia, thriving in the dense forests and rugged terrain that surrounded Viking settlements. Packs would roam near villages, drawn by the scent of animals or the opportunity for an easy meal. During winter, when natural prey was scarce, wolves were especially bold, often attacking herds of sheep, goats, and cattle sheltered near or even inside human dwellings. The loss of livestock could mean disaster for a Viking family. Animals were critical for food, clothing, and tools, so protecting them was a priority. Longhouses often housed livestock in attached pens or even inside during severe weather, relying on the body heat of animals to help warm the dwelling. However, this practice attracted wolves and necessitated constant vigilance. Vikings developed several strategies to deter wolf attacks. Physical barriers such as sturdy wooden fences and thorny hedges surrounded settlements to keep predators at bay. The positioning of villages on hills or near rivers also helped create natural defenses, as wolves generally avoided crossing deep water or open spaces. Human presence itself was a deterrent. Night watchmen, armed with spears or axes, patrolled village perimeters, especially during the vulnerable hours of twilight and early night. These watchmen played a crucial role in warning of wolf packs approaching and rallying defenders to protect livestock and people. Additionally, dogs served as early warning systems and protectors. Viking dogs, often large and fierce, were bred and trained to bark at and confront predators. Their keen senses alerted villagers to danger long before wolves arrived at the fences or pens. The wolf threat also entered Norse mythology and folklore, reflecting the deep respect and fear these animals commanded. Wolves were powerful symbols, feared as monstrous beasts associated with chaos, like the giant wolf, Fenrir, and other times admired for their strength and cunning. This ambivalence shaped how Vikings viewed the natural world, dangerous, yet interconnected with human life. Despite precautions, wolf attacks could be devastating. Stories in sagas recount villagers losing animals, homes, or even lives to these predators. The threat reinforced a sense of vulnerability during the long winter nights, when darkness and cold already tested endurance. Yet, facing the wolf threat also fostered community cohesion. Protecting the village required cooperation, labor, keeping watch, and supporting neighbors. These collective efforts were as vital to survival as fire or food stores. As you imagine the quiet watch by the longhouse fire, listen for the faint howl on the window, reminder of the wild forces pressing at the edges of Viking life. How did the ever-present wolf shape not just physical survival, but the cultural and spiritual landscape of the Viking world? The constant threat of wolves shaped not only Viking daily routines, but also their social structures and collective mentality. During the harsh winter months, wolves, as relentless hunters, forced communities to remain vigilant, reinforcing bonds between neighbors and sharpening survival instincts. Viking villages developed rotating night watch systems, where able-bodied men took turns guarding the settlement. These watches were not casual duties. They required readiness for sudden confrontations. Armed with spears, axes, and sometimes bows, watchmen patrolled the perimeter, listening for the faintest sounds of prowling packs. Their presence was a deterrent, but encounters with wolves were sometimes unavoidable. Wolves hunted in coordinated packs, their tactics well suited to breaking through defenses or isolating prey. This meant that even fortified villages had to be constantly alert. The cold, darkness, and fatigue from long days only increased the danger, making night watches grueling yet indispensable. In addition to physical defense, Vikings used psychological tactics. Loud noises, fires, and torches were employed to scare off wolves. Bell ringing and shouting were common methods to disrupt wolf packs during attacks. These practices often involved the entire community, reinforcing a sense of unity against a shared enemy. The importance of dogs in wolf defense cannot be overstated. Large Viking dogs acted as early warning systems and first responders. Their barks and aggressive behavior helped keep wolves at a distance, giving humans crucial time to prepare. Some sagas mention dogs fighting fiercely alongside their owners, highlighting the animal's valued role. Beyond practical measures, the wolf threat permeated Viking belief systems. Wolves symbolize chaos and destruction, but also resilience and cunning. This duality was reflected in stories and rituals, where wolves were both feared adversaries and respected creatures. The mythic figure of Fenrir, a monstrous wolf destined to bring about Ragnarok, embodied this ambivalence. The social pressures of constant threat forged stronger community ties. Cooperation in defense and resource sharing became vital, especially when wolf attacks resulted in the loss of valuable livestock. Those who lived on the edges of forests, closer to wolf habitats, were often more experienced in tracking and repelling predators, passing down essential knowledge through generations. Yet, the wolf threat was not merely an external danger. It shaped internal dynamics too. Fear and exhaustion from long watches could lead to tension and conflict, testing the resilience of the group. Balancing vigilance with rest was a delicate act. As you picture the dimly lit longhouse, with watchmen standing guard against the howling night, consider how this relentless pressure influenced Viking culture. How did living in constant proximity to such dangers shape their values, stories, and sense of identity? The looming presence of wolves during the long Viking winters left a profound imprint not only on daily survival, but on the cultural and spiritual fabric of Norse society. Wolves, as both tangible threats and powerful symbols, shaped how Vikings understood their world and their place within it. The reality of living alongside these predators instilled a sense of respect and fear for nature's raw power. Wolves embodied the unpredictable and dangerous aspects of the wilderness, reinforcing the idea that human survival depended on vigilance, courage, and cooperation. This relationship with the natural world is vividly captured in Viking myths and sagas, where wolves often represent forces of chaos, but also necessary balance. The monstrous wolf, Fenrir, destined to play a central role in Ragnarok the Norse apocalypse, symbolizes this tension. Fenrir's eventual breaking free from his bonds and swallowing the god Odin reflects the inevitable clash between order and chaos. Such stories echoed the real fears Vikings faced: the wild forces outside their settlements threatening destruction, yet also the cycle of renewal after devastation. In practical terms, the wolf threat drove innovations in village defense, animal husbandry, and social organization. Stronger fences, better livestock shelters, coordinated night watches, and trained dogs all evolved as responses to the predator's presence. These measures required community coordination, reinforcing social bonds crucial for winter survival. Spiritually, wolves were woven into rituals and beliefs. Some rituals may have sought protection from wolves or invoked their strength. Warrior culture admired the wolf's fierceness and pack loyalty, qualities mirrored in human ideals of bravery and camaraderie. Wolf symbolism appeared in warrior garb, names, and totems, reflecting this deep connection. The wolf threat also shaped daily life rhythms. The need for vigilance during the long nights influenced sleep patterns, work schedules, and social activities. It fostered a culture where alertness and preparedness were valued traits, essential for facing a harsh environment filled with dangers both natural and human. Today, as we reflect on the Viking experience, the wolf stands as a reminder of the delicate balance between humans and the wild. It symbolizes how survival depended not just on physical strength, but on cultural resilience, respect for nature, and communal effort. So, as you settle into rest, listen closely to the imagined howl on the wind and echo of ancient challenges, met with courage and unity. How does this story of wolves and Vikings inspire you to think about the boundaries between humanity and the natural world? When we imagine Viking raids, we often picture long ships cutting through calm seas under bright skies during the warmer months. Yet, Contrary to popular belief, Vikings sometimes launched raids deep into the winter season, a time known as the Season of Storms. These winter raids reveal the boldness and adaptability of Norse warriors who faced fierce weather and darkness to seize opportunity. Winter raiding was a dangerous undertaking. The seas turned treacherous with ice, high winds, and freezing temperatures. Navigating in storms required skill and courage. A single misstep could send a ship to the depths or strand crews on hostile shores. But Vikings, renowned sailors and navigators, adapted their tactics to the harsh conditions. Winter raids were often smaller, more targeted strikes rather than large-scale invasions. The element of surprise was crucial. Enemies were less prepared. During the cold months, expecting attacks to cease with the sailing season. This allowed Vikings to exploit vulnerabilities in coastal villages and monasteries, especially those with valuable stores of winter provisions. Logistics played a vital role. Ships had to be reinforced against ice and cold, with crews dressed in layered wool and fur to withstand freezing spray. Planning included careful timing, using brief windows of calmer weather. Raiders also stocked provisions for longer voyages, knowing that retreat or resupply might be difficult. The harsh environment shaped raiding strategies. Vikings preferred quick, decisive strikes, raid, plunder, and withdraw before weather or enemy reinforcements could respond. Attacks often targeted food stores, livestock, or wealth hoarded for winter, striking at the heart of communities' survival. Winter raids carried risks beyond the weather. Illness and frostbite were constant threats, and isolation in hostile lands during frozen months increased the danger of capture or starvation. Yet, the potential rewards, rich plunder and weakened enemies, motivated these daring ventures. Winter raiding also had psychological effects. The shock of attack during a season assumed to be safe could devastate morale and disrupt enemy plans. It demonstrated Viking tenacity and unpredictability, sending a message that no season was off-limits. As you imagine these storm-tossed raids, consider the determination and adaptability needed to face not only human foes but the unforgiving elements. What drove Vikings to risk this season of storms for plunder, and how did these raids influence their reputation across Europe? The boldness of Viking winter raids was matched only by the meticulous planning and adaptability required to execute them successfully. Facing freezing temperatures, fierce storms, and treacherous seas, Viking leaders had to carefully consider every aspect of their expeditions, from ship preparation to timing and tactics. Winter raiders often reinforced their ships to withstand ice and freezing spray. Wooden hulls were sealed and strengthened, and sails made from heavy wool were treated to resist moisture. Crew members wore layered clothing crafted from wool and fur, providing insulation against the biting cold and wind chill. Despite these precautions, frostbite and hypothermia were constant threats during extended voyages. Navigators relied on their intimate knowledge of coastal geography, celestial cues, and experience to find shelter and avoid dangerous waters. Whether windows, short periods of calmer seas were critical for setting sail or retreating. Timing was everything, as storms could arrive suddenly and turn a daring raid into disaster. Once ashore, Vikings employed swift, targeted tactics. Winter raids avoided prolonged battles. Instead, they focused on rapid strikes against lightly defended targets. Coastal farms, isolated monasteries, and storage sites for winter provisions were prime targets. By striking where enemies least expected, raiders maximized loot while minimizing exposure. The cold also shaped the behavior of those defending against raids. Villagers, weakened by scarcity and fatigue, often had reduced capacity for resistance during winter. This vulnerability made the timing of attacks particularly effective, yet defenders sometimes used the harsh environment to their advantage, setting traps or retreating into fortified locations to wait out the attackers. The psychological impact of winter raids extended beyond immediate losses. The message that Vikings could strike even in the harshest conditions instilled fear and uncertainty among European communities. This reputation enhanced the Vikings' leverage in negotiations and trade, as potential victims sought to avoid provoking such relentless foes. However, winter raids were not without internal challenges. Morale and health among raiders could suffer during long, cold campaigns. The threat of frostbite, hunger, and isolation tested discipline and leadership. Successful raiders needed not only physical endurance, but also strong organization and motivation. The season of storms tested Viking resilience, pushing their skills and spirit to the limit. These raids, though dangerous, showcased their adaptability, turning the brutal northern winter from a barrier into a tactical advantage. What remains intriguing is how these daring winter ventures shaped the Vikings' interactions with the wider world. Did the experience of battling both elements and enemies in winter foster a unique culture of toughness and innovation that influenced Viking identity for generations? The legacy of Viking winter raids is one of audacity tempered by reflecting a culture that embraced hardship as a pathway to opportunity. These raids were more than mere acts of plunder. They were strategic moves that shaped regional politics, economies, and cultural perceptions across Europe. By striking in winter, Vikings exploited a critical vulnerability in their adversaries' defenses. Communities, drained by the seasons, demands, and lulled by assumptions of seasonal safety, found themselves suddenly exposed. The psychological shock of a winter raid could undermine morale and destabilize local power structures, making it easier for Vikings to negotiate alliances, demand tribute, or secure trade privileges. Moreover, winter raiding fostered innovation. Viking shipbuilders and navigators adapted their designs and techniques to handle icy waters and stormy seas, pushing the limits of their technology. Leaders honed skills in logistics and timing, balancing risk against reward in a hostile environment, where mistakes could be fatal. The cultural impact of these raids also resonated through saga, literature, and oral tradition. Tales of daring winter attacks added to the Viking reputation for fearlessness and cunning, inspiring both awe and dread. These stories reinforced social cohesion and valorized qualities essential for survival in a harsh world. Yet winter raids also highlighted the interconnectedness of environment and society. The season of storms was not merely a backdrop, but an active force shaping human decisions and history. Vikings did not simply endure winter, they harnessed its challenges, transforming nature's harshest season into a strategic asset. Today, reflecting on Viking winter raids offers insight into how humans adapt to extreme conditions, leveraging resilience and ingenuity. It reminds us that even in the most forbidding times, boldness and careful planning can open doors to survival and influence. As you drift into sleep, imagine the roar of crashing waves beneath icy skies, the swift strike of a longship cutting through winter fog, and the quiet resilience of a people who mastered the art of winter war. What lessons might we take from their daring about courage, adaptation, and the will to endure? Winter in the Viking world was a season of enforced stillness, a time when the relentless cold and snow curtailed farming, raiding, and long sea voyages. Yet, beneath this apparent dormancy, a quiet but vital activity thrived inside the warm walls of longhouses and workshops. Winter was the season of crafts shipbuilding, toolmaking, and preparing for the busy months ahead. The pause in outdoor labor allowed skilled craftsmen to focus on projects that required precision and time. Shipbuilding, one of the Vikings' most celebrated crafts, often took place during winter. The construction of a single longship was an immense undertaking, involving selecting the right timber, shaping planks, and assembling the vessel with intricate joinery. Winter offered several advantages for shipbuilders. Cold, dry air helped preserve the wood and slowed decay, while the absence of farming duties freed laborers for focused work. The frozen ground also made transporting large logs easier, as sledges could slide over snow and ice. Tools, vital to everyday life and survival, also received attention in the winter months. Blacksmiths worked to repair or forge new iron implements, axes, knives, nails, and farming tools. These craftsmen operated forges inside or adjacent to lot houses, where the heat of the fire provided some relief from the cold. Woodworkers and leather workers crafted everything from household items to weapon handles and clothing fasteners. These crafts required patience and skill, traits honed during the long months when time was plentiful, but resources were limited. Winter was also a time for apprenticeships and the transmission of knowledge. Young Vikings learned the crafts by assisting masters, ensuring that skills passed down through generations. This cultural continuity was essential for maintaining the complex technology and craftsmanship that supported Viking society. Waiting for spring was more than idle anticipation. It was a strategic period of preparation. By the time the ice melted and fields thawed, ships had been repaired or built anew, tools sharpened, and provisions stored. The community could then swiftly resume activities vital for survival and expansion. Despite the apparent calm, the winter workshop was a hub of activity and quiet urgency. The success of the coming seasons depended on the work done in these months of waiting and making. But this raises a question. How did the focus on craftsmanship during winter influenced Viking culture, identity, and their remarkable ability to explore and conquer new lands? The emphasis on craftsmanship during the long, harsh winters was more than practical preparation. It deeply shaped Viking culture and identity. The skills honed in winter workshops formed the backbone of their society's resilience and expansion, enabling Vikings to navigate, trade, and conquer across vast distances. Shipbuilding, in particular, was a source of pride and technological innovation. Vikings developed the iconic longshipper, marvel of design, combining speed, flexibility, and durability. These ships allowed Vikings to cross open oceans and navigate shallow rivers alike, facilitating exploration, trade, and raiding. The meticulous winter work on ships ensured they were seaworthy and ready for the demanding voyages of spring and summer. The collaborative nature of winter crafts reinforced social bonds within communities. Working side by side, craftsmen and apprentices exchanged knowledge and stories, strengthening cultural continuity. These gatherings served as informal schools, where young Vikings absorbed not only technical skills, but also values of patience, precision, and perseverance. Blacksmiths held a particularly important role. Their work extended beyond tools and weapons to include repairing armor and creating items of daily use. The availability of well-crafted equipment could mean the difference between survival and death in battle or harsh weather. Winter crafts also spurred creativity. Woodcarvers and leatherworkers embellished their creations with intricate designs and knots and mythological motifs, reflecting Viking art and spirituality. These decorations were more than aesthetic. They symbolized identity, protection, and connection to the divine. In addition, the pause in agricultural activities gave time for reflection and planning. Community leaders used winter to strategize on trading routes, alliances, or raiding targets. Craftsmen and warriors alike prepared for the challenges ahead, aligning their skills with the community's goals. This winter culture of craftsmanship and preparation highlights a profound adaptability. Vikings did not simply endure the cold months. They transformed them into a productive season that laid the groundwork for survival and success. Yet, how did this cycle of labor and waiting affect the Vikings' view of time and their place in the natural world? Did the rhythm of winter crafts and spring voyages shape a unique understanding of life's cycles and human agency? The Viking cycle of winter craftsmanship and spring renewal reveals a worldview deeply attuned to nature's rhythms, a balance between patience, preparation, and action. This understanding shaped not only practical survival, but also cultural values and spiritual beliefs. Winter's long pause was not a time of inactivity, but a deliberate season of focused labor and communal growth. The patient work of blacksmiths and artisans prepared the community for the bursts of activity that came with thaw and longer days. This cyclical rhythm reinforced an appreciation for timing and the limits imposed by nature. The ships built or repaired during winter were more than transportation. They were symbols of Viking identity and ambition. Each vessel carried stories, hopes, and the craftsmanship of many hands. These long ships connected Vikings to the wider world, enabling exploration, trade, and warfare that defined their era. The detailed craftsmanship of tools and weapons reflected a respect for materials and skills passed down through generations. Viking artisans combined functionality with artistry, embedding cultural meaning into everyday objects. This fusion of utility and beauty created a sense of continuity and pride. Spiritually, the rhythm of winter and spring echoed Norse cosmology of death and rebirth, darkness and light. The slow work of winter crafts paralleled the land's dormancy, while spring voyages embodied renewal and growth. This natural cycle was mirrored in human life, reinforcing a connection to the environment, an acceptance of its forces. Moreover, the communal nature of winter crafts fostered social cohesion. Shared workspaces and apprenticeships strengthened bonds and ensured the survival of knowledge. This social fabric was vital for resilience in a harsh world. Reflecting on Viking winter crafts invites us to consider our own relationship with cycles of work and rest. How might embracing seasonal rhythms and patient preparation enrich our modern lives, reminding us that even in stillness, growth is possible? Winter's harsh grip did not spare the Vikings from death. In fact, the cold months often saw an increase in fatalities due to illness, accidents, or the ever-present dangers of the season. How Vikings dealt with death during these frozen months reveals a great deal about their beliefs, social customs, and relationship with the natural world. The cold presented practical challenges for burial and mourning. Frozen ground made digging graves difficult or impossible in many places. In some cases, bodies were kept in cold storage either within the longhouse or in special outdoor pits until the earth thawed enough for proper burial. This delay was more than practical. It carried spiritual implications. Viking burial customs were deeply connected to their beliefs about the afterlife. They saw death as a transition to other realms, such as Valhalla for warriors or hell for others. Proper burial rites were essential for ensuring the deceased's safe passage. Winter's obstacles could complicate these rites, causing anxiety among the living about whether the dead were properly honored. Superstitions and rituals intensified during winter. The long nights and the presence of death heightened fears of restless spirits and malevolent forces. Norse folklore contains many stories of the dead returning as undead beings who haunted the living. These tales likely served as cautionary reminders to observe burial customs meticulously to protect against such threats. Families performed rituals involving fire, symbols, and sometimes protective charms placed with the body. The hearth fire was central in these practices, believed to guard against evil spirits and preserve the soul's journey. Communal gatherings for mourning took place inside longhouses, where stories of the deceased were shared, and rituals performed to comfort the living and honor the dead. These gatherings reinforced social bonds, reminding the community of their interconnectedness even in lost. In some regions, burial mounds or ship burials were used to mark graves, serving both as memorials and as spiritual beacons. The care given to these resting places reflected respect for ancestors and a belief in their ongoing influence. Despite the harsh conditions, Viking communities found ways to balance practical necessity with spiritual duty. The management of death in winter was both a challenge and a testament to their resilience and cultural depth. Yet, this raises a question. How did winter's constraints shape Viking perceptions of death and the afterlife? And in what ways did these beliefs influence their daily lives during the coldest months? The difficult task of managing death during the harsh Viking winters deeply influenced their beliefs about the afterlife and the spirit world. Delays in burial rites due to frozen ground created a liminal space where the dead remained close to the living, heightening awareness of mortality and spiritual vulnerability. This close proximity to death intensified superstitions. The Vikings believed that spirits of the deceased could linger as drags, restless beings who might harm the living if not properly appeased. To prevent this, families took great care in maintaining fires, performing rituals, and using protective symbols. The hearth, as the heart of the longhouse, became a sacred space where the boundary between life and death was carefully guarded. These fears shaped everyday behaviors during winter. People were cautious about disturbing burial grounds and attentive to omens or signs believed to indicate spiritual unrest. Dreams and visions related to the dead were taken seriously, often interpreted as warnings or messages from beyond. Communal mourning rituals were vital in addressing these fears. Gatherings around the fire allowed the sharing of stories about the deceased, reinforcing their memory and easing the transition between worlds. Songs, prayers, and offerings were part of ceremonies designed to honor the dead and protect the living. Interestingly, Viking burials varied depending on social status and circumstance. Ship burials, where a deceased was laid in a boat with grave goods, were reserved for prominent individuals, symbolizing their journey to the afterlife. In winter, preparing such elaborate burials was especially challenging, often requiring the community to work together despite the cold. The season also influenced the symbolism associated with death. Winter itself was seen as a metaphor for death and dormancy, a necessary phase before renewal. This cyclical view of life and death gave meaning to the hardships endured and offered hope for rebirth in spring. The relationship between death, superstition, and winter was thus complex, intertwining practical realities with spiritual beliefs. These traditions helped Vikings cope with the uncertainty and dangers of the cold months, providing structure and comfort. Yet, one might wonder, how did these winter death customs influence Viking attitudes toward life, community, and the natural cycles that governed their existence? The intersection of death, winter, and superstition profoundly shaped Viking culture, influencing their view of life and the natural world. Far from being solely a time of hardship and fear, the cold months became a season of reflection on mortality, community, and the cycles of nature. The careful rituals surrounding death and burial reinforced social cohesion. Funerary practices brought families and villages together, reminding everyone of shared ancestry and responsibilities. The communal aspect of mourning fostered resilience, allowing people to support each other through loss amid the isolating. The effects of winter. Symbolically, winter's death-like stillness was part of a larger cosmology. The Norse saw life as cyclical seasons, mirrored the journey of the soul through death and rebirth. Just as the land lay dormant beneath snow, so too did the spirit rest before renewal. This perspective offered comfort and meaning, tempering fear with hope. Burial sites, whether modest graves or elaborate ship burials, served as physical connections to ancestors. These resting places were maintained and revered, believed to influence the living's fortune and protection. Ancestor worship and respect became integral to Viking identity. The fear of restless spirits also led to cultural innovations. Protective charms, rituals, and taboos around death informed social norms and behavior, reinforcing order and boundaries within the community. These practices highlighted an understanding that human life was intertwined with unseen forces, requiring balance and respect. Winter death customs reveal a society negotiating the harsh realities of nature, while embedding those realities within a spiritual framework. This balance between the practical and the mystical helped Vikings endure long, cold winters with dignity and purpose. As you drift to sleep tonight, consider how ancient peoples faced mortality amidst frozen landscapes, transforming fear into ritual and isolation into community. How might acknowledging our own mortality and connection to natural cycles deepen our understanding of life today? After the long, relentless grip of the Viking winter, the first signs of spring brought a profound sense of relief and renewal to northern communities. The transition from darkness and frost to lengthening days and thawing earth marked a crucial turning point, a time when survival shifted from endurance to action. Spring was heralded by subtle changes in the landscape. Snowbanks began to melt, revealing patches of green grass and early wildflowers. Birds returned, filling the air with unfamiliar songs after months of silence. Streams once frozen solid resumed their steady flow, carrying away winter's remnants. These signs were more than environmental. They were signals that life could resume its natural rhythms. For the Vikings, whose lives were tightly bound to the seasons, spring meant the promise of planting, fishing, and travel. It was a call to gather strength and resources that would sustain them through the next winter. Communities emerged from their long indoor confinement, ready to repair buildings, prepare fields, and rebuild boats. The work of winter crafts, shipbuilding, tool-making, and mending came to fruition as people launched vessels for fishing and trade. The thawing earth allowed farmers to plow and sow, beginning the cycle of growth anew. Spring also carried symbolic weight. In Norse belief, the changing seasons reflected cosmic cycles of death and rebirth. The return of light after the dark months was celebrated in festivals and rituals, reinforcing hope and community bonds. These ceremonies often involved feasting, storytelling, and offerings to gods and ancestors. Yet, the transition was not without its challenges. The thaw brought muddy, unstable ground, flooding, and unpredictable weather. Early spring storms could still be fierce, reminding Vikings that winter's end was gradual, not sudden. The risk of famine or disease persisted until crops matured and food stores replenished. Despite these difficulties, the anticipation of spring's arrival was a powerful motivator. It shaped daily life and planning throughout winter, providing a horizon of possibility during the darkest months. The first green shoots and returning birds symbolized resilience and the enduring cycle of life. As you settle into quiet tonight, imagine the soft drip of melting snow, the distant call of returning birds, and the ancient hope carried by those first fragile signs of spring. How might this slow emergence from winter's hold inspire patience and renewal in your own life? As the early signs of spring unfolded across the Viking world, communities began to shift their focus from survival to renewal, embracing the season's promise while remaining wary of lingering dangers. The transition was a delicate balance, hopeful yet cautious. The thaw transformed the landscape gradually. Frozen rivers began to flow again, enabling fishing to resume after months of scarcity. Fish, such as salmon and trout, returned upstream, providing a vital food source after winter's limited diet. Fishermen prepared their nets and boats, ready to take advantage of this seasonal bounty. Fields, still muddy and uncertain, required attention. Farmers repaired fences damaged by snow and ice, cleared debris, and prepared plows. Sowing could not start until the soil was workable, so patience was essential. The success of the year's harvest depended heavily on these early efforts. The return of migrating birds signaled not only seasonal change, but also guided agricultural timing. Observing nature was crucial for Vikings, who had no modern calendars. They read the environment carefully, using birdsong, budding trees, and insect activity as markers for planting and travel. Socially, spring marked a resurgence of communal activities. Villages held festivals to celebrate the end of winters. Hardships, reinforcing social bonds weakened by months of confinement. These gatherings combined practical planning with spiritual renewal, featuring offerings to gods like Freya, associated with fertility and growth. Travel became easier as snow receded, opening trade routes and allowing raiding expeditions to launch. Anew, longships, crafted and repaired during winter, finally took to the waters. The increased mobility connected communities across Scandinavia and beyond, fueling economic and cultural exchange. Despite the promise of spring, challenges persisted. Early thaw could cause floods, damaging homes and fields. Unpredictable weather meant that sudden frosts could harm young crops. Disease risks remained high as weakened populations adjusted to changing conditions. Yet, Vikings understood that nature's cycles were relentless. The hardships of winter and the uncertainties of spring were part of a continuous rhythm, one that demanded resilience, adaptation, and communal effort. As you imagine this time of cautious hope, think of the patient hands tending fields, the watchful eyes observing the skies, and the shared relief at winter's retreat. How might this seasonal transition remind us of the delicate balance between endurance and renewal in our own lives? As spring fully emerged, the Viking world transformed. From a frozen, dormant landscape into a vibrant and bustling environment filled with renewed energy and purpose. This seasonal shift was not merely a change in weather, but a profound transition that shaped the rhythm of Viking life and their understanding of the world. With thawed rivers and softened earth, Vikings could finally resume their essential activities. Fields were sown with barley, oats, and vegetables crops crucial for sustaining communities through the coming year. The successful planting marked a moment of hope, a tangible investment in survival and prosperity after months of scarcity. The return of longships to the water symbolized mobility and connection. Trade routes reopened, linking distant settlements and fostering exchange of goods such as furs, metals, and foodstuffs. Raiding expeditions, which had paused during winter's severity, now resumed, influencing the political landscape beyond. Scandinavia, spring festivals celebrated these transformations. These communal gatherings combined feasting, storytelling, and religious rites, acknowledging the cycles of nature and human life. They reinforced community bonds frayed by winter's isolation and renewed collective spirit. The symbolism of rebirth and renewal was deeply embedded in Norse cosmology. Spring's arrival mirrored the mythic cycles of gods and nature death, giving way to life, darkness yielding to light. This understanding fostered resilience and acceptance of life's inevitable hardships. Yet, spring was also a reminder of nature's unpredictability. Floods, late frosts, and storms could undo months of careful preparation. Vikings remained vigilant, their respect for natural forces unshaken by the promise of growth. Reflecting on this seasonal transition invites us to consider the importance of patience, preparation, and community in overcoming challenges. The Vikings' ability to endure winter and embrace spring teaches a quiet but powerful lesson. Life's cycles demand both resilience and hope. As you close your eyes tonight, envision the soft warmth of spring sunlight breaking over thawing fields, the sound of rushing rivers freed from ice, and the stirring of life after long stillness. How might the slow, steady return of spring inspire your own renewal and growth? Thank you, quietly, for being here with me tonight. Together, we've wandered through the cold and shadowed days of a Viking winter, a time when every breath hung heavy in the air, and survival was a slow, steady dance with the harshest of seasons. I hope this gentle journey has wrapped you in a soft cloak of calm, just as the Vikings wrapped themselves in layers of wool and fur long ago. As the story settles, imagine the quiet hush of snowflakes drifting down, covering the world. In a tender, white blanket, feel the warmth of a flickering candle, its light flickering softly before it fades into peaceful darkness. Wherever you are now, may your night be just as still as theirs once was. If you feel like it, quietly join us again by subscribing, but only if that feels right in your heart. There's no rush, no noise here, only a gentle invitation. Now, let your mind drift like the settling snow, soft and slow, into the calm of night. Sleep well, my friend, beneath the quiet stars. Good night.